Can you take a second to talk a little bit about what is emergency use authorization and why it isn't inherently different than FDA approval?
Yes, I'm going to hedge a little bit because this is not my area of expertise. But I've followed it somewhat. It's emergency approval. A part of this is, FDA approval. It can be a very long process. There's a lot involved in it. So my understanding is that the emergency use partially is involved to help expedite a genuine response to an emergency. It does not mean that due diligence isn't done. There is, I am so sorry, I think it's VBAC. There is an actual vaccine board of advisors that the FDA consults. I listened in on that meeting, I think for the Moderna, might have been for Moderna. They had it for all three of them. And what this is that they do these clinical studies. So for example, and I'll just use, I think it was Moderna. I read all the papers for it. So let's go with Moderna.
All right.
They test this, they look at it kind of in vitro. They then put the vaccine in mice. They study its effectiveness. They then put the vaccine in primates, and then they put it in humans. And they have huge amounts of data from this. Once it's in humans, they then do they do these large clinical studies with tens of thousands of people. And they send all of this data to the Vaccine Advisory Board, which is about, the PDF document was 100+ pages. And this board of qualified immunologists and virologists read through this. They have a day-long meeting where they bring in representatives from the company who's developing it, scientists who can speak to it, other doctors that can talk about its efficacy, and they debate the benefits of this vaccine compared to any side effects, compared to any other issues that might arise from this. So, and that's all the emergency authorization. So they really do a deep dive. My understanding is it's mostly a difference in terms of bureaucracy and paperwork and kind of needing to dot T's and I's. But the emergency use authorization has been validated. They do look into all the data and it is safe.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing to remember too, is that, oftentimes in bureaucratic processes, and if you follow politics really closely, every bureaucratic process has its own fun name attached to it. But at the end of the day, there is vetting done. These are safe. People who are professionals are looking into these, right? Like, Joe Biden isn't up there being like, I decide this because, fiat president power or whatever. Like, no, like he's receiving advice from dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of people who have looked at this, who've done the research, before making statements. And this is true of the Trump administration too. Love them, hate them, same thing with Biden, right? They're not making these decisions because they looked at the vaccine or the virus themselves, right? There's a whole apparatus of individuals who are highly qualified that are making these decisions, helping this move along. And I just think it's important to remember that when you hear these words, it doesn't mean it's any lesser. It is still safe. It has gone through all these tests. And actually, I think one of the reasons the clinical trials went so fast is because there were gazillions of people who wanted to volunteer to do this.
Well, part of the reason the clinical trials were able to be concluded so quickly was because this was during the fall surge of COVID cases. So clinical trials are concluded when X number of people have the virus. So part of the reason clinical trials can take so long is that generally viruses are kind of contained and we don't have, hundreds or thousands of people being infected every day. So part of the reason the clinical trials were able to wrap so quickly is that there's a predetermined set number of, if this number of cases is reached, we're done, we have our data. And that number was reached very quickly because there were so many community cases of COVID during that time.